Well, I'm so happy to be here with all of you who are hopefully going to tolerate my presentation for St. Michael's Day.
Mhm.
Um, this is a deeply personal presentation for me. I just wanted to start out by letting you know that a year ago, I was losing a lot of my faculties, my ability to write and walk and swallow. And I was given a tentative diagnosis of ALS. And I started, writing my obituary and trying to figure out who would take care of me. And then, in a sort of Michaelic moment, a neurosurgeon talked to me and said, "Oh, it's your neck." And he found out that my cervical spinal cord was being compressed. And on the day before Thanksgiving, he did an emergency surgery, which freed up my spinal cord. But during that year, and I had just lost my father and the father of my children and my sort of life partner for the last bunch of years, all the men in my life were dying and I was losing my faculties. And when I regained some of my faculties, I was called to share what's still living in my mind and my spirit, because my mind and my spirit remained very active even when I couldn't control my body. So this is the third presentation I've given. It marks one of the three cardinal points and festivals of the Christian year and other years there are other spiritual movements that celebrate these four cardinal points. Yesterday was the equinox, where light
Mhm.
and dark are equal. And while I'm talking in the introduction, I hope you're soaking in one of my favorite images of the Archangel Michael holding the scale, because this is a time where Libra is in ascendance. And just so you know, I was born on St. Michael's Day. I didn't know anything about St. Michael when I was born, but I was born on his day. And I will just tell you a little bit about how I came to be here. I was born into a very large and fractious family. My mother taught all eight of her children to read when they were four so that they would go into their rooms and be quiet and not bother her. And most of my siblings played the piano. So there was a lot of verbiage and percussive piano playing. And it was really a rather hostile environment for me. I was the third of eight, and I was the left-handed child. And I didn't really relate that much to words and to the percussive sound of the piano. And so we moved when I was 10 to a house in Lexington, Massachusetts, and seven of my siblings lived with my parents on the second floor, and they put me on the third floor. And I lived up there by myself in a sort of dreamy world. I was very nearsighted, and I soothed my soul by studying art. My parents had a set of books that had been put out by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they had a volume on composition, on color, on how you turn two dimensions into three dimensions, all the different aspects of art. And in the front of the books, there was a sleeve with 9 by 11 glossy photographs of the art they were discussing. So I would lay out the art and I would soak in the images. And one of the images I'll tell you when we get to it was one that I took in when I was 10 years old. And I had no religious training, no spiritual background, but up in my third floor room, I created little altars and I made little spiritual ceremonies. I was seeking for a spiritual path, but I was not given any guidance except through the images that I saw. And then when I went to college, I started studying art history, and many of the images that my soul was steeped in these images, and I found my path to a Christian belief and pretty early on, I became an Episcopalian, and when a couple of years ago, I found St. Michael's in Austin, Texas, at the time when all of these losses were happening, and I became a member, and actually I'm very grateful that St. Michael's has given me this space to share some of my experiences. So I'm hoping that one or more of these images will soak into your soul in the way they did mine, because I think we're all living in a time where we feel that the world is a menacing place and we don't know how to interact with what can appear like overwhelming evil and an inability to bring our own sense of ourself and our spirit and our truth into that world. And the way I do it is by studying images. So, this first image that I'm showing you, and I'll show you it in a few other slides, is by an artist, Roger van der Weyden, and he was doing his work in the middle of the 15th century. And if you can imagine it, the person in his community who held the most wealth commissioned an altarpiece, 15 panels. This is what I'm showing you here is just a part of one of 15 panels that this person commissioned for a hospital that he created in order to take care of people who had the plague. And it was dedicated to Saint Anthony of Egypt, who was known for caring for those who had pestilent sores. And so this image was actually placed in front of the beds of those who were suffering from plague. And there wasn't any real treatment for the plague except palliative treatment, wrapping their wounds and caring for them. And this wealthy man who donated this altarpiece and had it set up in front of these suffering souls, his wife would bind the sores of those who are in those beds. So they would lie there and they would see this image of the Archangel Michael clothed in snowy white robes and holding the scale. And it actually was I'll show you the larger image where St. Michael is actually the mediator between the image of Christ above sitting on a rainbow and there are other angels in the image, and you can see that Michael is the mediator. An angel is a mediator, a messenger. The word angel means a messenger from God. The sound El, that is the Hebrew word for God. So Michael, the angel, is the mediator between our world and the heavenly world, and he's weighing the souls. You can see that in the scale of someone who has sinned is drawn downward, and the scale of someone who's been virtuous is lighter. So there's this balance between gravity and levity, between light and dark. So this is a perfect image for this time of the equinox, the time of Libra, our time when we are trying to find our place. And the balance is not stasis. The balance is in constant motion. It is an image for us of how we weigh our decisions, how we relate to what is true and good and beautiful in the world. And if you look at a detail of the image of Michael, you can see his wings are covered with eyes. And if you think of a winged being think of the eagle who's flying, and his wings and his sight are really one and the same. It's as if he's seeing and breathing and flying and discriminating between the light and the dark, between levity and gravity, between darkness and light. And what this made me think of was that here, let me show you this next image. This is a tiny little watercolor painting by Albrecht Dürer from the middle of, or actually early in the 16th century. Oh, actually, I want to go back. You're going to have to humor me because I wanted to just quote for you. You know, the Archangel Michael shows up in Revelation, right? We have, God created the world, all that is seen and unseen. And what we're going to be talking about today is really the world of the unseen. And so at the end, where we have the Alpha, the beginning, and the Omega, the end, that's when we see this image of Michael in the scripture. And I'll just read it to you. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And there's one other passage in the Old Testament that refers to the Archangel Michael, and it's in Daniel 12. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince who has charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn away who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. And I just want to mention that Michael is what's called a theophoric name. The root of the name of Michael is a rhetorical question, which means, and remember the L is God. Who is like God? That is Michael is a question. Who is like God? And the presumed answer to the question is that there is a God who is not us. There is a power higher than us that organizes the universe and separates out the good from the evil. So I was just thinking that winged beings have been a feature of spiritual life in many cultures and still to this day. And I wanted to just share this little watercolor painting of Dürer's. It's about 7 inches by 8 inches. It's tiny. And Dürer felt that living into the natural world, the image of creation, was a way that the divine was reflected on earth. And these blue wings were supposed to be symbolic of the cherubim. The word cherubim, its root word is a blessed child, and it was the image of the cherubim was a blue wing attached to a face, and the cheeks were like the heart of the image, the red heart at the core, and the blue wings were like an image of the firmament. And these wings of the cherubim were said to spread their wings over the Ark of the Covenant. And I think it's in Psalm 91, it says, he will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. So I find this image very comforting. And, we're born into this world. Ideally, we're born head down, and our head meets the ground, the floor, the threshold, the pelvic floor, and we pass head down through the threshold. And then we have to learn to crawl and then walk and then think. And who among us has not then, in our imagination, lifted ourselves into flight? Many of us have dreams of flying, and flying is in that world in between the solid and the mystical. So it's that whole area of the messenger, that which communicates between what we know and what we seek to know. And this is not something that began with Christianity. In ancient Egypt and also in ancient Sumeria, there were winged beings who were the images of the divine. And this is an image from Egypt of the god Horus, who is part of the Trinity in the Egyptian gods. There was Osiris who died and was brought back to life, and Isis, and then the third figure was Horus, their child, and he was imaged as a hawk or a falcon with his wings outspread. And you can see down below at his waist, there's this image of a sort of a sphere with an arc over it. And that was the hieroglyphic symbol. You can also see it up above on his head, the disc, the sphere of gold, and the line below it. That was the hieroglyphic image of protection. So we see something that both inspires and protects. And this is a sculpture from Egypt of the god Horus with his wings surrounding the head of the pharaoh. And I just wanted to show it because it shows an image of how the winged beings come up from behind, from the unknown, and they enfold us and protect us and infuse us with a sense of comfort and calm and inspiration. So that was how these winged beings were seen in ancient Egypt. And I think we'll see some of this quality of coming up from behind, where we have practically no sense organs, and enfolding us. I know you've probably been in groups where they want you to be in a circle and fall back and trust that you will be caught. I think this is the perfect image of how, with faith, we can fall back and the arms of something greater than us will hold us and protect us. Now, in ancient Greece, there were also winged beings, but they were different. You know, Greece was that time when the gods were all sort of cavorting about, and Zeus was seeing, whatever nymph he could impregnate, and the gods were squabbling. They were more like, human beings in a certain way. But the god Hermes, or Mercury, as he's called in the Latin, was this winged being who was also a messenger figure. So in the Greek time, I feel that this image of Mercury also gives us another way of looking at a winged being as a messenger, and his wings are on his feet and on his helmet. And the god Mercury also carried the sign of the caduceus, which was both us. Oh, I wanted to show you this first. This is just a beautiful first century Roman sculpture of the feet of the god Mercury, where you can see his wings lifting up the feet from gravity into levity. But the caduceus is an amazing simple symbol. I'm not going to go into all the nuances of the rod with two serpents and the rod with one serpent. You can look all that up online. But the basic image of healing and of trade is of this staff with wings and then serpents not on the ground spitting their venom, but somehow contained and controlled. Their energy is a helix around that staff and lifted up by the wings. And you can imagine that the healing, you can use the venom, for example, it's used for healing purposes, not to poison. So these images were emblazoned in people's imaginations, and I think they can still help us to understand how we can deal with evil that surges up when we feel a surge of envy or greed or a lust or whatever it might be, that we have something that can lift that up. We have the faculties to discern how to control it. We have our conscience. And I just wanted to share this with you. It's actually right behind me. You probably can't see it, but this is a caduceus that my son Peter made. My son had just finished a master's degree in fine woodworking, and I had my own practice in medicine. And he had carved me a caduceus, and someone stole it from my office. So, I was kind of heartbroken because I loved that image in my office. So he made me this one. This is a piece of walnut, and embedded in the walnut background are the wings, I think, in ash, and then there's bloodwood. I can't remember, maybe an aspen. There are all these different woods that are actually inlaid in the walnut panel. But these images um, have deep significance. This is a fresco by Michelangelo, and of course, I draw your attention to his name, Michelangelo, because there are very few people who are named Michelangelo, Michael of the Angels. Michael is one of the most popular names in the world, I believe. But Michelangelo was a very special being, and this is a little painting, not little, but part of the Sistine ceiling, which covered the from creation to the flood, and then at the end there's a last judgment, such as we saw with the first image of Michael that I showed you. This is the image of the brazen serpent. It's the story from the Old Testament where serpents were poisoning the people of Israel who were worshiping gods that weren't the true God. And Moses was told to lift up this brass staff with a serpent on it. So here again in this image, the serpent who is controlled by the vertical image is a healing image. And everyone at that time understood that this was also an image of the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden and the image of Christ on the cross. At that time, people lived into the spirit through images. They couldn't read. Michelangelo could read the Old Testament in Latin, but most people couldn't read. So they saw these images, and every image was connected to many other images. So they would see the staff with the serpent and would call forth a network. It was like a spider web of images where if you touched one point on the web, it lit up multiple other points on that web. And that's what I'm hoping to share with you today. I hope it's not too verbose, but I have to use words to try to explain what I see in these images and what people much wiser and greater than I have seen in these images. But to go back to Greece and its images of winged beings, this, of course, is one of the most famous winged beings in Greece. And this is not the wings on the feet. This is the winged victory or winged Samothrace. And I just wanted to show it because to me, this was supposed to be on the prow of a ship. This flinging back of the arms, and the wings are the extensions of those arms in hope and victory, or again, over gravity. And you can almost imagine the ship. This was found in fragments in the 19th century and was put together is now standing in the Louvre and inspires many people to be lifted up out of their sense of hopelessness and despair and feel as if they can overcome what's in themselves. And I give you these images hoping that deep within yourself, it can lift up your own hope. Now, I can't leave Greece without sharing this image. This is a painting by Bruegel of the fall of Icarus. And Icarus, that story was a Greek legend. It was written down in Ovid's work. And it tells the story of Daedalus, who was a fine, wise craftsperson who had created the labyrinth in Crete. And he was imprisoned there with his son Icarus. And in order to escape from the dark labyrinth of, you could say, of despair, he created wings that, and he attached the wings to himself and his son Icarus so they could fly out of the darkness. And the one thing he did was warn his son Icarus, do not fly too close to the sun, because if you fly close to the sun, the beeswax that's attaching your wings will melt and you will fall. Of course, Icarus, being a young person, aspired to fly as close as he could to the sun. And for me, this is an image of one form of evil where we try to be God. We try to get so close to the sun that we are God. And the result is that his wings fell from him and he fell into the sea. I'm going to go back and forth between two images. I'm just going to show you. Oh, no, it has to go. I have to go forward. This is the image of Icarus. It's way in the corner of the painting. You can see his legs and perhaps one arm or a wing and a couple feathers plunging into the sea. But the world is going on. They don't see this tragedy. They don't see the pride. And I want to share with you this poem that was written by William Auden in 1938. And it was a warning to people when the Nazi occupation was happening, how evil and tragedy can happen, and how people just go about their business and they don't see the evil that is coming. So I'm going to read you that poem because to me, it really helps me to face what we are facing today. So this is what Auden wrote in 1938. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. He was looking at this painting. How well they understood its human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. How when the aged are reverently, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, there always must be children who did not especially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood. They never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course. In Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. The plowman may have heard the splash, the forsaken, but for him it was not an important failure. The sun shone as it had to on the white legs disappearing into the green water that must have seen something, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to go and sailed calmly on. So I just wanted to share that image that comes from the myths of Greece, but can connect us to this time, both when the painting was made in the 16th century and then in 1938 when poetry lifted this work of the old masters and gave us a way to face encroaching evil. And in my mind, this connected with the fall of the rebel angels, the story of Lucifer being cast out of the heavens with his host of heavenly beings. This is a detail of a painting by Hieronymus Bosch. It was done around 1516, and it's part of a much larger altarpiece called the Haywain Triptych. This is part of one panel. It's an oil painting on oak, by the way, and you can see it in Madrid in the Prado Museum. But I wanted to show it to you because Lucifer, if you look at Isaiah, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, or O day star of dawn, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? And this is saying to Lucifer, thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So that to me is one form of evil. When you aspire to be God, you have to be higher than God. And the result is to be cast out of heaven. And you can see that the way Bosch envisions this is that all the winged beings, instead of being winged with feathers, they become winged insect falling to the earth where there'll be crawling beings and gnats and mosquitoes and all the things that irritate and cause us harm. It's sort of like an image in Greece of Pandora's box, where, all of the evils of the world are let out when Pandora opens the box. And the angel wings are wings of feathers. Feathers are made of tubules that hold air. They're not these types of insect wings. The winged beings with feathers are a whole different type of wing. I'm just showing you this detail of the evil Luciferic beings being cast down out of heaven, down to earth where they live amongst us. I also wanted to show you these engravings by Gustave Doré, which he made to illustrate the great poem Paradise Lost by John Milton. These images of our fall from grace have inspired great art, great poetry, and these engravings to illustrate the poetry. I just wanted to mention that when I was a student at Harvard, I met my husband the first day I was there, and he was the one who told me about Michaelmas. We were talking in a long line the first day I met him, and he found out that my birthday was on Michaelmas, and he told me, "Oh, you're a child of St. Michael." And then I learned how to really appreciate this holiday for the Archangel Michael, which is easy to ignore. You know, if you go to the grocery store, it basically goes from summer vacation to skeletons and completely skips the holiday of the Archangel Michael. Anyway, this is an engraving of the Archangel Michael casting Lucifer out of heaven and down to earth. And this is another illustration by Doré, where Michael, with his wings uplifted, is casting Lucifer. You can see Lucifer is now cast down into the waters and is leaning against the shore. And finally, this image of the fallen Lucifer. And here you can see Lucifer brooding. It reminds me of an engraving by Dürer, which I won't show you because of time, of melancholia, all that darkness which draws us down and makes us feel despair. And you can see here the wings have become like bat wings. They're no longer wings of feathers, and he has fallen. And if you look carefully, I hope you can see it. Over to the right in the shadows, there is just the suggestion of Adam and Eve in the garden where the fall will take place. So you see, the fall of Lucifer is then associated with the serpent, the deceiver who is going to come into the Garden of Eden. Now, I also wanted to show you, before we get to the Garden of Eden itself, some other images of angels in the Old Testament. This is one of my favorite paintings of all time. It's a tiny painting by Rembrandt. It's about 8 by 10 inches big. And it's an image of when the three archangels, this is how they saw this Bible story at the time from Genesis, when Abraham and Sarah, they were in tents, but here they're in a house, were hospitable to strangers. And it just so turned out that the strangers were messengers from God. And in this image, the Archangel Michael is the preeminent being, and Archangel Michael was always a bit more lofty than the other archangels. And you can see he's just a being of light with his wings outstretched, and also he's just got his feet up. Do you see how his foot is just like he's just resting with his foot right in front of Abraham, who's sharing with him? I once did a whole lecture on feet in art history. I was giving a lecture for people who are caring for the feet of the elderly. And caring for the feet of the elderly is not an easy task, but it is one of the most precious things we can do for another human being, to care for their feet. It, brings up the image of Christ washing the feet of his disciples. Anyway, there's the Archangel Michael, and also then if you look to the left, there's the Archangel Gabriel, who's just taking a little bite of the food that they're sharing, and the Archangel Raphael with his wings kind of curled neatly behind his back. And it's just, this just came out of Rembrandt's imagination. The Dutch government actually paid for the Bible, the Old Testament, to be translated into Dutch in 1637. And this painting was from the 1640s. And Rembrandt was very close to the Jewish community and read the Bible as it was translated and brought these images into being from the Old Testament. And here we can see just an image of how we might interact if we are open and hospitable to beings that we might not otherwise see. This is the world of the unseen entering the world of the seen. And I, in my imagination behind Michael, can see a tree and the image of a serpent and a serpent's head coiling around that tree. So again, the oaks of Mamre that Abraham was living near call forth the tree in the Garden of Eden and all the images of the staff with the serpent being upheld. Now, this is another image that's associated with the Archangel Michael. It's one of the darker stories in the Bible, which is the sacrifice of Isaac, where Abraham is following what he believes God's word to be, to sacrifice his own son. And God sends his angel down to stop him. And you can see here the angel again, like that Horus image I showed you in Egypt. The evil angel comes up from behind, and his hand clasps the hand of Abraham's hand to stop him from doing this deed. And again, the angel's head is close to Abraham's head, and there's this deep enfolding sense of protection coming down from behind. This is a kind of a parallel image in my mind. This is also an etching of Rembrandt's from the Garden of Eden, of Gethsemane, where Christ is now, God is sacrificing his son to try to save us all from evil. And in this moment of deepest despair, God sends an angel down to comfort Jesus. So I see these two images, which were both done in the 1650s by Rembrandt, as kind of parallel images we can hold in our hearts of how we are held and protected by something that's greater than ourselves, even as the darkness of despair looms behind and the disciples sleep in the corner. And finally, I wanted to show this image that Rembrandt painted also of Jacob wrestling with the angel. And I am not going to go into a theological interpretation of what this image means. But this is the moment when Jacob spends the whole night wrestling with a messenger from God who was usually associated with the Archangel Michael. And here again, the snowy white robes and the enfolding wings. And the wrestling is partly an embrace. And you can almost see like the body of a butterfly, you might say, and then the wings that are opening up. And who among us has not spent an entire night wrestling with our conscience and knowing we've done something and trying to find the discernment to know what the best way is, what is the true and the good and the beautiful? And this is the moment, after wrestling all night with the messenger from God, that Jacob is given his true name, Israel, again with the God in it. And I would just point you also, when you have time, if you look at Emily Dickinson wrote several lovely poems about Jacob fighting with the archangel. And I think I forgot to read you the poem I wanted to when I was showing you the Durer painting of the wing. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without words and never stops at all. I just wanted to share some poetry as well as images, because to me, these are the most consoling ways of dealing with our current times. To me, the arts, making art, seeing art, reading poetry, making poetry, reading scripture, these are our ways of being in that world in between that the angels inhabit, that lift us out of gravity into levity. And I just also want to remind you, because this image reminds me of it, that we hold these images in our own structure. Just picture our own bodies. We have the wings of our pelvis. And then as we move up the vertebrae, up into the skull, the forms transform into the sphenoid bone, which is a bone with two wings, which hold the brain. And so we have in our bodies this image of overcoming gravity and opening the wings. And then in the brain itself, which is held in levity by the crystal clear cerebrospinal fluid, we also see wings in the ventricles. And then if we look at our faces, We see the eyes and the brows and the nose. The countenance is an image of the winged being that lifts us up. And what do we see when we're first born? We see the countenance of presumably our mother, but it's a loving countenance. And what we're trying to reach here through all these images and words is how to feel the countenance of something greater than ourselves that can lift us up out of our despair. Now, there were other archangels. This is the Archangel Gabriel. I'm just going to run through a few images. Gabriel was the Archangel of the Annunciation, and I will show more images of the Annunciation in my Advent presentation, but I did want to show you this beautiful image of that Fra Angelico did in the 15th century. This just decorated the walls of a little monastery where people devoted to a life of prayer and reflection would go to their meals together and be lifted up by images such as these. And there were also images of the Archangel Raphael, and the name Raphael means God heals. And this is a tiny little painting, which you can see in the National Gallery in Washington. And it comes from the story of Raphael and Tobias, which has always been one of my favorite stories. I named my son Seth's middle name is Tobias because of this story. This image of Raphael, the Archangel of healing, which is associated with the image of Mercury, the Greek god of healing. Tobit was tasked with going to find a remedy to cure his father's blindness, and he was promised he would have companionship on his sojourn. And so he was given two companions. If you look down to the lower left, you'll see there's a little dog there. So he was given an animal companion, and any of you who have pets know how comforting it can be to have the companionship of an animal, but he was also given the companionship of an archangel holding his hands, and the Archangel Raphael has in his hand a little holder to make the remedy that will cure the blindness of Tobit's father. So to me, these images of being accompanied in a way that's loving and healing are tremendously healing for me at this time. There's also, these are paintings by Filippino Lippi, an Italian painter from the 15th century. This one shows Tobias with three archangels. Can you imagine living in a world where three of the archangels would come down and accompany you on your journey? So to the left is Michael with his sword, Raphael in the middle with his little healing, container. Tobias is holding the fish that the remedy is made from. And then over to the side is the Archangel Gabriel with his lily, the lily of the Annunciation. And I just the fish calls to mind that images were used from the very beginning of Christianity to call people into an interior space. Just think of the artists, the early Christian artists in the catacombs. They would just carve a fish into the stone. They couldn't use their words. They couldn't hear music. They had to be silent. But carving a fish would call forth multiple images of Christ as the fisherman, and the healing nature of the fish and the fisherman. I'm going to show you this one last image of the Archangel Raphael with Tobias. It is one of my favorite paintings. It's by Perugino, and it was for an altarpiece that was commissioned for a chapel dedicated to St.Michael, and it was one wing of a three-part altarpiece. So on one side you have the Archangel Raphael, which is this panel. I'm just going to show you a detail of the Archangel Raphael. And you can see this is, again, the world of the unseen. This is the world, when before God made humans and male and female created he them. This is the world of a being that encompasses both male and female still, and is this quiet and tranquil and healing presence that I feel can lift us up in this time. This is the whole altarpiece. You can see to the right is Raphael in the center, what all of this is calling the Christian toward, which is the birth of Christ with angels up in the heavens. And then over in the left, the Archangel Michael here with his armor of iron and his sword and his shield, which brings out the other quality of Michael, which is not just holding the balance, but also being willing to be a strong force, a protective force, willing to stand up and fight for the good. And these images of the Archangel Michael were deeply meaningful from early Christianity on. Just to mention, there were also these archangels known in ancient Hebrew times, and in Islam, there were people were aware of whole hosts of angels. I'm not going to talk a great deal about it because I don't have time, but in the 5th century, the person who was known as Dionysius, a pseudo-Areopagite, who was a Neoplatonist, laid out the 9 hierarchies of angels. The 3 highest were the seraphim, the cherubim, and the thrones, and then there are the middle 3, which I'm not going to talk about. And then the lower ones were the archi, the archangels, and the angels. So here we're dealing with the realm of an archangel, but there are all these hosts of other beings above and below. And, you know, in Christianity, we tend to focus on the more direct connection with a God. But I think at this time it helps us also to feel the accompaniment of these other beings. And this early Byzantine image of the Archangel Michael, where he's holding a sphere with a cross on it. And I just wanted to show you a detail of that sphere. The symbols on it were deeply resonant to the people who worship these small images. And you can see the X, which was a symbol of Christ. And to the left, that may look like an A, but it's actually a triangle, which was a symbol, a Greek symbol for diokos, which meant basically righteous, and the K was a sign for Kratos, which meant judge. So it was Christ, the righteous justice or righteous judge. Again, this weighing of what is good, true, and beautiful. And Archangel Michael is the mediator who helps us to approach that righteous judge both out in the world and in ourselves. Now, here is a more familiar image, perhaps. This is a painting from the Baroque period of the Archangel Michael with Satan or Lucifer under his feet. This is from the 17th century, so all of the sharp contrasts of light and dark and the diagonals are strongly at play. And here the Archangel Michael is garbed as a Roman soldier with a Roman sword, and the swirling warmth of the blood circulation, you might say, circles around him, and he's clothed in the contemplative blue. And under his foot, you have the Satan now shown as a human being. And I will just tell you that the myth at the time, or the rumor, was that the painter Guido Reni had been dissed by a Catholic cardinal. And this painting was commissioned by a pope. And so Reni then painted the face of the cardinal as the figure of Satan. And I just want to mention that because even in those times, satire was used to address things that were not really happening appropriately in the world of power. And there was satire used going all the way back. You can go to the Greek plays of Aristophanes. Laughter and satire were always part of the fight of good against evil. This is a little tiny cabinet painting. That's what it's called. It's about 10 by 12 inches, and it's by Raphael of the Archangel Michael. It's from the early 16th century. And I wanted to show it to you because people didn't just do large paintings in church. They did tiny little paintings that they held in their studies, little contemplative paintings, and they were called cabinet paintings. And this is one of my favorites. It shows the winged Archangel Michael holding his snowy white sword with a red cross, and below him you can see there's one dragon-like figure, but there are multiple figures, the ones that have fallen from heaven, the host of devilish beings, and then people who were in the in-between realm. But the snowy white sword with a red cross was also deeply symbolic, and it's been used in darker ways. But the red cross, although it was used during the Crusades, it was also supposed to be an image of healing, and that's why the Red Cross used the red cross against the white background to be a sign of healing in battle. And the battle was supposed to stop for the healing, and that's part of this image of Michael. Michael also did this little cabinet painting of St. George, and I wanted to just draw your attention to the fact that an earthly image of St. Michael is in the images of St. George. And they often get confused, but St. George was, the stories were laid down in the Golden Legend, and in the Middle Ages, these were especially meaningful. And in that story, a village was occupied by a dragon, and the village had to appease the dragon by feeding its sheep. And when the village ran out of sheep, they had to start feeding it humans. And when the daughter of the king of the realm was to be fed to the dragon, then St. George appeared on his white steed and slayed the dragon. So this was also a deeply personal image of when evil needs to be vanquished. This is not like sins that get to be weighed and you get to be forgiven. This is evil that needs to be vanquished. And this is the image I told you about that I saw when I was a 10-year-old child up in my room staring at art. This is a 15th century painting by Paolo Uccello, and his name means little bird. And he was also a mathematician and an astronomer. So he laid out his image with lots of mathematical symbols. And in this image, the dragon, I don't know if you can see it, but the princess is actually holding the dragon by a little leash that she has held in her arm. And the dragon is being then slain by St. George, who comes in with his steed and his sword. So this image was imprinted onto me at a very early age, that good could overcome evil. And finally, I wanted to show you this image because you might be able to see it. This is in Boston. This is at the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum, and it's a painting by Crivelli, who painted it also in the 15th century. And here, the image of evil, the dragon, is rearing up right into the space of St. George, who lifts both his arms off. He's not controlling the horse with his arms anymore, but with his feet, and his arms are flung up with the sword. And in the background, you can see the tiny little image of the princess who's being saved from being devoured by the dragon. So all of these images you can lay down in your soul to give you courage to face the current moment. And that's, I believe, this was a painting by Fra Angelico from A Last Judgment. We can picture that there's a world of seraphim in red and cherubim in blue, all the hierarchies of the angels who are here to help us. This is just one picture of a seraphim who was supposed to have 6 wings. It's a fresco by Giotto, and it's part of a fresco where St. Francis had an image of a seraphim. And I just wanted to show it to you because there are different ways to show these heavenly beings. And because we're about to move into where the seraphim and the cherubim come down into the earthly sphere, I wanted to show you that. Now I have to do this rather quickly, and I apologize, but I'm happy to go back and show anything and answer questions after we're done. So now we're going to go back to where the scene is. We've been living in the world of the unseen. This is a scene of the creation. This is also by Hieronymus Bosch, who painted that image of Lucifer being cast out of the heavens and all of the winged beings falling to earth. This is that moment when Adam and Eve are created anew, male and female created he them. You can see they're in this garden, which is a cultivated space. There's a suggestion of the tree over to the left. There are multiple trees, tree of life, tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You can even see the lower left. The cat is already catching a rat. So you get a sign that all is not perfect in the Garden of Eden. But there is this sense of newness and freshness. But any of you who have raised a 2-year-old child or taught a 2-year-old child or have a 2-year-old grandchild know that if you tell a 2-year-old child, you can have all the cupcakes at this table. Just don't eat this one table with a, cherry on the top. You know what's going to happen. And we can't really fathom, I don't think, why. God created all this beautiful space where the Adam and Eve couldn't really make decisions by themselves, but they could enjoy the great majesty of creation. But he specifically said, don't do this one thing. Don't do the thing that will make you like God. Don't know about what is the difference between good and evil. This is another image by Bosch, and it shows you more of the story. Here you see Eve being created from the rib of Adam at the bottom, then being tempted by the serpent. Lucifer has fallen. He's in the garden. He's tempting Adam and Eve, and then them being chased out of the Garden of Eden. It was a cherubim who was set at the gates, but usually that cherubim is shown in red in this instance instead of its usual blue. This is the cherubim who's got the coal of fire, like in Isaiah, the image of the heavenly being who's lit up with the fire of justice and is set at the gates at the east of Eden, which is where we're currently residing. And because I wanted to show you this whole image, this is the image by Bosch of that whole panel from the triptych where you see the image of God who looks like Christ above, surrounded by a nimbus of light, the heavenly dark beings falling to earth, and then the creation of Adam, the temptation, and the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And these images would be living in people who couldn't read. They would see these images and they would live with them deeply in their hearts. Just to turn to a few other images of the Garden of Eden, of evil, this is a painting by Masolino. It's a very narrow painting. It was for a tiny chapel called the Brancacci Chapel in the 15th century in Florence. And there were 2 paintings beside the doorways. Masolino stands, it's a nickname for Tommaso, and he was known as Thomas the Delicate One. That's what Masolino means. And he was painting right next to his collaborator, Masaccio, whose name was a nickname for the messy Thomas, Masaccio. So the delicate Thomas and the messy Thomas were painting at the same time in 1427 in this little chapel in Florence. And fresco is done very quickly. It's like you have to think it and put it right away into the wet plaster. And here we get to see the image of evil. You see the very pure figures of Adam and Eve. And here evil looks just like us. It gives you the aspect of evil that it approaches us in a way where it is tempting because it looks like us. It looks like what we want. It pretends to be something it's not. It's the great deceiver. It's the head that's attached to a serpent's body but has no heart or lungs in between. So that's one image of evil. And then Masaccio's painting of the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the garden, again, in this very narrow, compressed space, where the angel is above and casting them out. And you can see in this image, this incredible image of the suffering of Eve and Adam covering his face, and even the rays of light, which are like the rays of the Holy Spirit, casting them out. This is just a detail of that. And this is a fresco by Michelangelo a century later up in the Sistine ceiling. And here I think we can see that when we say the Lord's Prayer, lead us not in temptation and deliver us from evil, This is an image for that. Here we see the evil is like a serpent wrapped around the tree in the garden, and Adam and Eve are spiraling around to the left, and the evil serpent is like a twin to the angel on the right, the cherubim who's casting an Adam and Eve out of heaven. There are two sides, in a way, of the same coin, the light side and the dark side. And in the temptation, they go to the dark side, but the dark side is the freedom to choose. And that's how we get to come in all our consciousness to choose between what is right and wrong, to weigh whether we are doing something that's going to harm another human being or is going to help another human being. This is a detail of the Sistine ceiling that was cleaned after I studied it and taught it. And I find the colors a bit jarring. Used to be covered with layers of, uh, smoke and such from the ceremonies that were held there, but I thought I would show you that image because I think it's an important one to hold. And this, of course, casting out Adam and Eve into the, you can see it's like a desert plain here. This is one of my favorite images of evil. It's by Hugo van der Goes, who actually was hospitalized for mental illness, but he did a number of beautiful devotional paintings also in the 15th century. And this was a small painting that was part of a two-sided, a little altarpiece, devotional altarpiece. And this image was paired with an image of the Marys mourning over the dead body of Christ, which I'm not going to show you due to time. But I do want to draw your attention to two things. One is the little iris plant that grows up and conveniently hides the private parts of Eve. And the iris was a symbol for everybody who knew about these web of symbols of the suffering of Mary in the Passion of Christ and the loss of her son. So here in this image of Eve, who's reaching up to fall into temptation, there is the image of the salvation that is to come. And the image of evil here is like a little female salamander. It's kind of cute and fetching, and it has an iridescent quality, sort of opalescent, like a mother of pearl. And you can see the quality of evil can, it's like when your granddaughter wants to get into a really cool clique and she sees something that looks kind of appealing, and it's not going to, tell her that the clique is going to be mean to all the other girls in her class. You get taken in by something that looks fetching and desirable. So evil is not always something we can discern right off the bat. Now, here is an image of evil where we can see that it's evil. This is a painting by Duccio of the temptation of Christ in the desert. This is the third temptation. And here evil is clearly evil. He reminds me of the flying monkeys in The Wizard of Oz, which terrified me throughout my entire childhood. Here it's a dark, like hairy monkey-like being with wings. Again, they're not feathery wings. They're more like bat wings. And this is the image where the devil tempts Christ. This is the third temptation, with having power and dominion over all the kingdoms of the outer earth. So it's the type of evil like Lucifer that wants to be like God and wants to draw us down into our selfish, greedy selves. And that here we get this image of evil. And I think it leads us to think of the, sort of two sides of evil. One that wants to be like God and be dissolved in God. And we don't worship God, we try to be like him. And the other which tries to draw us down into pure materialism, where all we can think about is ourselves and our own greed. And I wanted to end this section on evil, and I will get out of the evil before we end, I promise you. This is a painting, one of my favorite paintings, and you in Texas can see this painting. It's one of the only old master paintings in Texas. It's at the Fort Worth Museum. And this is a painting by Michelangelo. He did it when he was about 12 years old. So you get a sense of why he was named Michelangelo. 12 years old. And he didn't create the image from scratch. It's a copy of an engraving that was done by a German engraver in the 15th century, Martin Schongauer. And he, when he was 12 year old, decided as he was learning to paint that he would paint the engraving and give it color. So this is St. Anthony, who was also known to be associated with healing in the desert. And he's being tempted by all these really awful winged beings. And to me, this is a perfect image of what our life is like today. This is all of the text messages that you got while you were trying to watch this presentation, all the distractions, all the things that draw us down, that irritate us. And then in the center, there's this sense of calm and balance that we are trying to access. And how do we do that? We go deep inside ourselves. And this is an image of Mont Saint-Michel in France. And it was one of the earliest Christian sites devoted to St. Michael. Those of you who went in the pilgrimage or have ever gone on a pilgrimage will see that, this was a pilgrimage site. It was deeply religious and it was built up in all different ways. It was built up from the foundations with crypts and Romanesque chapels underneath, and then later was built higher. They didn't want to chop the top off of Mont Saint-Michel. It became an island when there was a tsunami in the 8th century. And in the 8th century, the Archbishop Aubert had a dream, and in the dream, the Archangel Michael came to him, touched him on the forehead, and left a dent in his skull. And there's a museum you can see there that has a skull with a dent in it from when, the creator of the first real abbey and building at Saint-Michel, St. Michael of the Sea, was inspired to do this building. And I think this image of surmounting the gravity within us with strength and fortitude is something we can carry with us in this moment. That's the more modern sculpture of St. Michael at the pinnacle of what's done now. Oh, I have to go back one more. There's this beautiful quotation that's from Henry Adams, who wrote an essay about here it is. He wrote an essay comparing Mont Saint-Michel, which was a heavy Romanesque building, this building, with the cathedrals, the Gothic cathedrals. And this is what he said about the feeling you get when you go into St. Michael's, this holy site. Men and women who have lived long and are tired, who want to rest, who have done with aspirations and ambition, whose life has been a broken arch, feel this repose and self-restraint as they feel nothing else. And I feel that that is something we need today. Many of us in this room are at that stage of life where we feel like a broken arch and we're seeking this sense of repose. And these images of St. Michael and the winged beings of the past, I think, are a way we can approach that in our inner lives. And I just wanted to share this also for those of us who are nearing the threshold. This is another image by Bosch. He not only painted images of Lucifer cast out of heaven and the temptation, but this is an image of what might happen to us after we cross the threshold and get to be accompanied by angels through the tunnel of light into the heavenly space. And I think it is like a soothing image that's worth having sink into your souls at this moment, that we know that we are accompanied, that we're going to meet others of those of us who have departed from us, and that there will be some sense of meaning and grace in our lives. In the moment, I have just these 2 more slides, so bear with me. This is a painting by Rembrandt of the dream of Joseph, in which the angel comes to him in his dream to help him to save his son from the massacre of the innocents. And I show it to you because to me, it's one of the most beautiful images of an angel created out of light. And many of you know I did my thesis on how Rembrandt used material, pigments and oil and canvas and transformed it so that we can appreciate spirit just by looking at this image. And this is to me, one of the most beautiful images, how light and levity can come and heal us if we can hold such images in our hearts. And finally, this is the last image. This is the angel who comes to Matthew to inspire his gospel. And this is the angel I want to leave you with, the angel who comes up behind us, like the figure of Horus, who comes up behind the Pharaoh, or the angel who comes up behind Abraham. This is the angel we can awaken in us, who can lead us to the word and lead us into, say, writing a gospel, or finally writing that poem, or making that painting, or living with poetry and living in art, and being able to lift us out of despair into a world where we can make a positive difference. And my image of that for this time of Michael is a bit of a nerdy science one, but bear with me. There are two molecules in the universe that are mirror images of each other, and those are the molecules of chlorophyll and the molecule of hemoglobin. And chlorophyll is the molecule in the green leaves, and it has four prongs and holds a mineral. It's like a ring with a jewel in the center of it. And this is the time of year when all those green leaves are turning golden and falling to the ground. The image of hemoglobin is four prongs of iron holding the oxygen. It's like a ring that holds the air. So for me at this moment, I feel rising up in myself all of these little molecules of iron holding air and lifting me out of the darkness. This is a way that I can relate to this moment of Michaelic iron, his armor, his shield, his wings, his scale. All of these aspects rise up in me where my lungs meet my heart, and the hemoglobin is able to both carry the warmth of the metallic element and hold also the air that lifts me up into the world of the angels and the hereafter. So I hope that I've been able to share some images of with paintings and words that might be meaningful for you at this time where we honor St. Michael's Day. Thank you so much.